When we were 5, they asked us what we wanted to be when we grew up. Our answers were things like astronaut, president,
overly analytical critic who endures the worst stories for his audience's entertainment. So Bella and her friends all get to attend their graduation without incident. I would love it if this scene actually served a purpose. And this may be the cynic in me talking, but the entire speech feels staged since most of the students look like they're actually paying attention to the ceremony. Do you want to know the one thing I remember from my high school graduation? Somebody blew up a beach ball and we all took turns bouncing it around the auditorium from our seats. The scene almost feels like it's supposed to make Bella reflect on her choice to become a vampire, wondering if she's really ready to give up everything from her human life, or if she's rushing into something she doesn't really comprehend.
This isn't the time to make hard and fast decisions. This is the time to make mistakes. Take the wrong train and get stuck somewhere. Fall in love. A lot.
And this could have been a good turning point for Bella if she ever paused to reflect on this idea. Book Bella had her apprehensions and wondered internally if she was ready to die. But the book didn't give us much of the graduation scene, only telling us the bare elements around it, like Bella getting her diploma and chatting with friends, so there was very little for Bella to reflect on. Likewise, the movie added the speech for effect, but never showed the audience her internal conflict, nor did it ever show Bella reacting to the speech later, as if wondering if she was actually making a mistake or not. The movie did a lot to improve the overall story, like showing scenes away from Bella's perspective, but by not utilizing the scenes in conjunction with others, they come off as filler. After the graduation ceremony comes the graduation party, complete with music, lights, friends, and apparently enemies.
What are you doing here?
You invited me, remember?
Was my right hook too subtle for you? That was me uninviting you.
Obviously, Jacob's gross violation of trust isn't something that can just be written out in a single scene and would take a lot of hard work to repair over a long period of time.
Wow. You made this? It's really pretty.
You did it! Congratulations!
This moment was less conclusive in the book, where Bella mulled over Jacob's actions for a lot longer, with him even chiming in with, "You could accept my apology, you know." Nothing screams sincerity like demanding someone just get over their problems already. But the party scene has to be cut short, as Alice has a plot-convenient vision of the future.
You're not going to Seattle.
No. They're coming here.
This leads to a meeting of the Cullens and the Wolves who happen to be at the party. The Cullens share what they know about the newborns coming for Bella and when.
We'll be here in 4 days.
Jacob and the others immediately agree to help, which will give the vampires a tactical advantage. Not only will they have more numbers, but any psychic powers the newborns develop might not work on the werewolves. Plus, Riley's runaways won't know about the wolves and wouldn't be able to prepare for them. There's just one issue.
We'll need to coordinate.
Carlo, they're gonna get hurt.
We'll all need some training.
Training would be a great idea, but how are they supposed to really learn anything if they only spar for a single night? Sure, a little bit of training is better than none, but what few lessons everyone can learn, they never really use in the climax. But that's a whole separate discussion that I'm saving for part 5. What's even more pressing is that while the vampires train, the wolves just sit on the sidelines and watch. They may have powerful instincts and enhanced abilities, but their collective combat record is somewhere between the Cleveland Browns and the Minnesota Timberwolves. This group of wolves has fought only 2 vampires. Most of the last year has been spent failing to kill a single vampire who kept darting in and out of their territory like a mouse with a death wish. Their only kill was Laurent, who was running away when he died and was outnumbered 4-1. With those stats, they have worse combat records than several Disney princesses. But believe it or not, the real purpose of this training scene isn't to train, but to give Jasper a chance to blurt out his backstory, something the movie has already teased several times.
It takes more than one of our kind to cause the damage they're reporting. Quite a few more.
Fighting newborns requires knowledge that Jasper has. Jasper has experience with newborns.
Fleshing out characters is usually a great idea, and God knows the upright piece of styrofoam that is Jasper desperately needs it. Did you even know that he had a power like Edward's telepathy or Alice's ability to look ahead in the script? It was revealed in the first book in a blink and you'll miss it moment. His power is being able to control the emotions of people around him and sense emotions in others as an empath. He did this in Twilight, when Bella was running away from the Hemsworth wannabe, and Jasper helped calm her down when she was starting to get overwhelmed. All the while never displaying emotions himself. Depending on the range of his powers, if he could project emotions onto others and calm them down, you know where he would have been really useful? In Italy, when Edward was trying to emo glitter himself to death. Up until now, Jasper's single personality trait has been borderline murder machine. His backstory does flesh him out a little bit, but out of all the exposition dumps in this book, I'd argue that his is the most laughable. Like all the other background exposition dumps, Jasper's story is broken into two parts. The first part details the idea of using newborns to create a powerful army to overtake towns or other covens, none of which Jasper was present for and only details secondhand. Why couldn't Meyer find a way to mix this with part of Jasper's story? Rambling on about stuff you weren't around for only works when Michael Pena does it. The part that Jasper was around for is what the movie shows us. He used to be a young major in the Confederate Army during the American Civil War. He was in Texas when he got distracted by a beautiful vampire lady named Maria, and she's what made the backstory so unintentionally hilarious. Not because of anything she said or did, but because of how the book presented her dialogue. What some books will do when they dive into a deep character exploration is they'll change the writing style to distinguish a section as different from the rest of the book. This could be changing POV, writing a section entirely in italics, changing font, and so on and so forth. The change is clear and easy to digest. Meyer chose to do the opposite, so you get these massive walls of text, all very obviously coming from Jasper's mouth. The image that the book conjures isn't jumping into the past to fill in some background, it sounds more like Jasper is standing there in front of Bella chatting about this thing he did once. And it's funny because Jasper doesn't allude to what Maria said or phrase his sentences to paraphrase what she meant, he quotes her directly, complete with descriptive prose. It comes off as extremely disjointed because it reads like a poorly written third-person perspective story, except Jasper is speaking every single word on the pages. The result is a very fragmented reading experience where you have someone giving heavy-handed narration, displaying a range of character and emotion they've never even come close to before now. It also doesn't help that Jasper's barely said more than 10 words at a time before this. I can't help but wonder how he acted when he was delivering these lines in the book. Like, was he changing his voice during the backstory? He seems right. Young, strong, an officer. The brunette paused and I tried unsuccessfully to speak. And there's something more. Do you sense it? She asked the other two. He's compelling.
Why are you talking like that?
But while we're on the subject of Jasper breaking character, I can't help but wonder how far he would go. What's your name, soldier? Maria asked me. Major Jasper Whitlock, ma'am, I stammered, unable to be impolite to a female, even if she is a ghost. I really hope you survive, Jasper, she said.
Why are you wearing a dress?
All of this would have been solved easily and with better appeal if the backstory had been told as a flashback instead of spoon-feeding Bella. Really, anything would have been a better method of conveying story, but Meyer is so set in her first-person narration that any deviation that might accidentally make it interesting has to be vigorously avoided. You know what all these backstories are like? The owl guy from the Legend of Zelda games. The one who blathers on about some boring introductory garbage that you don't actually care about and skip through as quickly as possible. Who slows down the gameplay so you can reread the same basic instructions, which kills the replay value. Who yaps on and on about so much nothing that I'm convinced Blathers from Animal Crossing is a secret parody of him. These moments are just massive, unengaging walls of text with no depth or substance. They mean very little for the characters involved. They could be condensed to a quarter of their length by a competent writer, and you just want to blow through it as quickly as possible so you can get to something better. Sometimes stories just demand long periods of explanation, but there are ways to work around those limitations and keep things entertaining with smart dialogue and creative prose. Just look at the Metal Gear Solid games and all their 10-minute long cutscenes.
Do you think love can bloom even on a battlefield?
Anyway, terrible storytelling aside, Jasper explains that Maria put him in charge of training her army of newborn vampires, all so she could get non-specific revenge for lost territory following a recent battle. Jasper was a useful recruit and, thanks to his emotion-controlling powers, was a natural at training the newborns, getting them into fighting shape and keeping them in line. But if he was so good at it, why did he leave? The movie kind of assumes you weren't paying attention and just moves along.
I thought what Maria and I had was love. But I was her puppet. She pulled the strings. I didn't know there was another way. Till I found Alice.
I would joke that this is like storytelling for an audience with ADHD, but the sluggish pacing and overly dragged out pauses contradict that. The book did go into a little more detail, but it comes off as anticlimactic. Jasper's emotions got to him, he got depressed, thought Maria could sense it and would kill him for it, then he just left, going along with two other vampires until he just happened to bump into Alice in some town years later. Not exactly a dramatic escape when he can just waltz out the front door at a moment's notice. The story advances in the next scene after Bella has some dream, using a rarely seen writing technique.
The intruder. The newborn army. They're all her puppets. Victoria.
That technique is called Because the Author Said So. Now shut up. Bella just figures out that Vicky is somehow linked to Riley's runaways because we gotta keep the story going somehow. This immediately conflicts with Alice's powers, because in this book, her powers are defined as being based on the decisions people make instead of some predetermined forecast. So, Alice can't see the newborns because she doesn't know who any of them are and doesn't know who to track. Fine, I get that. But she also can't see that Vicky decided to make the army in the first place and is the one routinely siring newborns.
Welcome to the army.
That just raises further questions!
Because the fight against Riley's runaways will be too dangerous for squishy Bella to be near, the idea gets tossed around that both she and Ed would head off to the mountain together. But because the newborns could follow her scent, they also decide to use Jacob as a personal taxi service to deliver Bella there.
Edward, they won't want to get anywhere near his odor.
In order to test this theory to confirm it'll work, Jacob bridal carries Bella and they take a casual stroll through the woods.
This is not a good idea.
Agreed! Jacob is big enough in wolf form that she could ride on his back. How much cooler would it be if Bella rode wolfback through the mountains like a ward from Lord of the Rings? I cannot be the only person who's thought of this. And like every single other scene when these two are alone together, Jacob and Bella end up talking about their relationship.
I'm not a wolf. I can't imprint.
It has nothing to do with imprinting. It has to do with feeling something for somebody. And I know you feel something for me.
Do I need to remind you that a good portion of this series is about a muscular teenager who could probably have his pick of the ladies, just pining over the most boring girl in class? The next several scenes all try to build up Bella's tensions about marriage, life, death, and what she'll be missing out on as a vampire. It leads to a quote-unquote steamy romance scene.
Stop trying to take your clothes off.
Twilight! Soccer mom tested, Jesus approved!
You've come. I mean, I knew you would come, but you've come.
I have.
So this scene is supposed to be Bella overreacting to her situation because she's getting all sorts of pressures from multiple sides and doesn't know what to do with her pent-up anxiety, but this had a really weak build-up. The shortcomings in the movie are in part thanks to Stewart's very limited range of facial expressions, the differences between which almost exclusively depends on whether or not her mouth is open. When your performance effectively paralyzes you from the nose up, you suck at acting. Granted, this does carry over from the book, but Bella at least had an internal monologue to supplement her bland personality. We knew the concerns going through her head, in part because she repeated them ad nauseum. However, the movie gives her things to ponder and worry about, but it never shows Bella processing those thoughts, trying to work out her issues or wonder if she's doing the right thing. Issues are presented, but Bella never responds to them. You'd get the same acting range from a quick doodle on a post-it note. And because Stewart can't emote properly, her problems seem shallow and not worth fretting over. This is like trying to empathize with a brick. Just imagine a brick sitting next to you. Do you feel sorry for it? What if I told you he was going through a nasty divorce? Do you still feel sorry for it? Really? Not even if he also lost his job? No, of course not. The brick isn't displaying any emotion and doesn't seem affected by anything going on around it. This is why I can't be bothered to care whenever I see Stewart on screen. It's not necessarily because she's a bad actress, but because Bella is a bland, tepid character with such a stunted personality that the audience can't relate to her. The only way Twilight gets away with this shoddy craftsmanship is because readers and viewers can put themselves in Bella's shoes and live the story vicariously through her. But at long last, we're finally at the beginning of the part of the movie where we're almost nearing the start of the big climax. Riley's runaways start their march across a logging camp and this one river, while Bella leaps into Jake's shirtless arms to be carried to Ed, hiding away in the mountains. Now, the plan is for Ed and Bella to lounge around in this campsite, far away from any exciting combat. The idea was for these two to lay low while the rest of the Cullens and the Wolfpack do all the work when the newborns show up, but so they're not completely out of the loop, the Lovebirds will be joined by Seth, one of the youngest wolves of the pack, who can keep them appraised of the battle thanks to the telepathic link they all share.
You should get back before the storm hits.
No, I'm staying.
But Seth's not here yet, so Jacob decides to butt in on this romantic getaway, which no doubt will lead to all sorts of wacky hijinks and misunderstandings between the throuple. During the night, a storm hits the mountain, and Bella isn't able to keep warm in her sleeping bag. Ed can't help since he doesn't produce body heat, and a fire wouldn't do much good against all that wind, so it looks like it's Jacob to the rescue.
Forget it.
She may need her toes someday. And let's face it, I am hotter than you.
I do want to congratulate Maya for actually coming up with a practical way to display Jacob in a better light than Ed through situational conflict. This feels like the first time in the entire series where being a vampire is actually something of a hindrance. The best Ed could really do to protect Bella in this situation was run her down the mountain to warm her up, but that would ruin the entire plan. Unfortunately for him, the easiest solution relies on letting Jacob spoon his fiancée.
Can you at least attempt to control your thoughts?
The next morning, Jake heads off to make sure the woods are clear, while Bella apologizes to Ed for having to endure seeing her wrapped in the arms of another man. And Ed confirms that it's not among his list of favorite evenings.
You have a list?
All 10 I spent with you. Number 1 is when you said you'd marry me. Mrs. Cullen.
But oh no, it was a ruse! Jake was right there, overheard the whole thing, and Ed knew it. Jacob is quite rattled, though I'm not sure why. He knows she's turning into an undead monster, so how can the idea of marital nuptials shock him? I don't know, I just don't see the idea of getting hitched as big a commitment as intentionally dying young and turning into an undead monster for all eternity. Regardless, this leads Bella to try to comfort Jacob, then we get this exchange.
You can't do anything. I can. By going out there and killing something.
No! You're not thinking clearly. Don't do that!
Well, maybe I'll get myself killed and make it simple for you.
No!
And we're gonna skip most of this conversation due to the length of the clip, but Jake refuses to calm down until he backs Bella into a corner.
Kiss me. I'm asking you to kiss me.
And this leads to a compelled makeout session. Remember kids, if you gotta rely on cheap tricks to get the girl, you have no game. And I think it's time we finally take a look at who Jake is and how his character was assassinated. Now, Jacob has never been the most upstanding citizen. He started out well enough, and was even kind of supportive for most of New Moon, until Alice showed back up. He's just held back because a lot of that niceness seemed to be motivated by the thought that he could probably get something out of Bella if he played his cards right.
What, I can't hold your hand?
No, of course you can. I just think it, means something a little different to you.
However, he took a complete turn for the worse in Eclipse. Possessive, aggressive, selfish, and sometimes violent. Many characters in this book go through changes that make them much worse through an objective lens, but Jacob went through the worst and most damning transformation. And to understand why with a little more clarity, let's dive into the world of psychology. Primary and sometimes secondary characters in a story generally work through some sort of an arc. That's how a character's growth is measured and displayed, and there are all sorts of ways to explore personalities through an arc. And to understand the arc Jacob goes through, I think it's important to reflect on the 1979 contribution of Dr. Lenore Walker in regards to her study of social cycle theory. You've probably heard of this theory before, only you may know it as the cycle of abuse. And while I don't think it's by design, Jacob's adherence to this cycle is downright alarming. The cycle of abuse has 4 steps: tension building, incident, reconciliation, and calm. Basically, the abuser in a relationship feels pressure from something and eventually reacts with uncalled aggression. This sometimes means physical violence, but it could present as verbal abuse just as easily. The incident step can be something like a shouting match, with the abuser threatening their partner, their children, or just being overly vulgar and toxic.
Every day I wake up and I hope you're dead!
Later, the abuser may feel fear or remorse over their actions. They promise it'll never happen again, and there's a feeling of calm for a while, until the pressure starts to build again and the cycle repeats. This traps victims in a loop of pain, fear, humiliation, and social grooming, which often lasts until they leave, or until they or the abuser gets arrested or killed. Dr. Walker's research suggests that it's exceedingly rare for the abuser to fully reconcile their actions, and that to break the cycle, the victim almost always has to escape themselves. There's a lot more to it than that, but I think that's enough detail to build my case. And just in case anyone needs it, or you know someone who needs it, here are some crisis hotline numbers that might help save a life. These numbers are free within the United States, and are repeated in the description of the video, along with other options for international audience members and links to Dr. Walker's work. Throughout the series, Jacob displays abusive behavior several times, with some signs even displaying in New Moon. Not only does he go through one complete cycle in Eclipse, but he nearly completes a second. Sure, he never outright hits Bella, but he is prone to violent outbursts and unchecked aggression when he's around her. The book opened to Jacob's apology note to Bella from his outburst at the end of New Moon. There's calm for a while, but tensions quickly rise, especially when Jake butts heads with Ed and Bella in the school parking lot.
You. Why haven't you called me back?
When he finds out about Bella deciding to turn into a vampire, he freaks out.
You knew this was gonna happen.
Not in a month. I mean, not before you've even lived, or before I could.
The fact that part of the wolf transformation involves getting angry is also a really unhealthy sign. Not to mention the matter of the forced kiss. Jake eventually feels guilt and apologizes.
Look, Bella, I'm sorry. About, the kiss in your hand. I blame it on the whole inner animal thing, but it was really just me.
And things go back to a sort of calm again for a time. Then the whole thing repeats itself, at least in part.
And don't start. Everybody makes choices. You're gonna have to accept mine.
But you can love more than one person at a time.
This cycle is especially toxic because it's not something that most abusers grow out of. Once they're set in their ways, unable to really control or even understand their aggression, lashing out just becomes routine. The fact that increased anger is an inherent part of being a shapeshifter really doesn't help the Quileute image or Jacob's attitude. I really have to wonder if this behavior was normalized throughout the other wolves in the book.
I make you nervous.
Sometimes abusers keep their aggression at a consistent level. Sometimes they escalate over time, which can lead to murder. Victims of this kind of abuse often still love their abuser and maybe think if they love the person just a little bit more or act a little better, things will change and improve. Unfortunately, that almost never happens.
She won't beat your nobody no more.
On some level, Bella almost does fall in line with his mindset, never fully pulling away from Jacob despite his alarming behavior. And I'm not blaming her. She did share a lot of good times with Jacob in New Moon, and I'm sure she'd love to recapture the feeling of who her old friend was. But I'm not convinced that Jacob was ever real. The best thing she could possibly do, even if it doesn't feel right, is to get away from Jacob and stay away. Too many abuse victims don't or aren't able to, and it never ends well for them. And she certainly shouldn't let Jacob date her daughter for a number of reasons. I don't care if imprinting means that Jacob can't hurt the baby or whatever BS description Meyer wants to give it. It sends the wrong message, and Jacob does not deserve any kind of reward for what he does in this series. On top of that, Jacob has become a manipulative creep. I think we've gone into enough detail about his aggression, but in true scumbag fashion, Jacob also twists Bella emotionally to get what he wants out of her. He spends most of New Moon treating her well enough, as long as she doesn't step out of line. But given how quickly he gets bent out of shape when she displays the smallest glimpse of independence from him, shows that he was never interested in who she was as a person. It was more like he wanted her for sex, and he thought he was close to getting something, like that kiss they almost shared in her truck. By the time Bella's ready to leave for Italy to save Ed, Jake gives her an ultimatum, which she goes against.
Stay here. For Charlie. For me.
This setup is what leads to Jake routinely trying to disrupt Bella's relationship with Ed. He constantly disregards Bella's word, no matter how many times she says she wants to be with Ed, and that she doesn't see Jake as a potential romantic partner.
I don't feel that way for you.
I don't buy it.
What don't you buy? That's how I feel.
You feel something else for me. You just won't admit it.
Jake is willing to completely ignore Bella's opinion and the possibility that she doesn't want to be with him more than Edward. In his eyes, she's less a person and more of an object to indulge himself with.
Relax. You'll warm up soon. Faster if you took your clothes off.
That's why in the book, he doesn't feel an ounce of regret for forcing himself on Bella until much later in the book, and he openly jokes about it with her father right after it happened. But then there's the matter of how he twisted things around while they were on top of the mountain. Bella's shocked when Jake overhears her romantic chatter with Ed, and she's emotionally vulnerable because while she isn't romantically in love with Jake, she still doesn't want to hurt him, and she feels guilty. Jake takes advantage of that guilt and backs her into a corner when she begs him not to rush into a battle where he could get injured or killed.
Give me one good reason.
Because I don't want to lose you.
It's not good enough.
Because you're too important.
It's still not good enough.
So, with no other ideas, Bella falls back and agrees to give Jake what he wants.
Kiss me.
This effectively rewards all of Jake's terrible behavior for the entire movie. All the unreasonable aggression, the emotional manipulation, and forcing himself upon Bella. I don't think I need to explain why that's a bad thing. Even at the end of the book, with Bella engaged to Ed, a wedding date set, and with plans to become a vampire, Jake still insists that he'll do something to win Bella's heart.
I'm exactly right for you, Bella.
Jake can't get past the idea that he can't have Bella and isn't placated until he falls in love with the unholy monster baby in Breaking Dawn. This whole dynamic is so toxic the story should have been set in New Jersey. And let me remind you, none of this is supposed to be a clear warning about how some guys are creeps and young women need to be cautious about who they let their guard down around. In Meyer's own words, this is supposed to be romantic. One of the biggest impacts the book left me with was how little regard Meyer had for Jacob. Experienced authors understand how to breathe life into a character, but a strong, well-defined character won't always do what the author wants or what the book's outline might dictate. They might take on a life of their own, and there will be plenty of situations where they say something outlandish or do something drastic, or go against what the author may have intended when they started writing. Sometimes, a detailed foundation is all you need to inform yourself about what a character would later say or do in life. It can make for some of the most satisfying writing an author can experience because the characters feel that much more alive. I know it might sound counterintuitive, but when you have a fully realized character, sometimes the best thing you can do is try to guide them along a particular path instead of forcing them. At that point, you as an author are not just writing down a cool story idea, you're describing the lives of these very real people as they live their lives outside of your complete control. However, this signals a very dark description for the characters of the Twilight series, especially Jacob. If Jacob wound up like this because it's what's natural for his character, then he's naturally a scumbag with a terrible foundation. If he wound up like this because it's what Meyer wanted all along, then Jacob's a scumbag and Meyer needs to see a specialist. So, with Bella giving in to Jacob's wants, the Wolf Boy decides to head off to battle. Maybe if he breaks a rib or two, he can get to second base. And let me tell you, the climax of this story is such an unmitigated waste of time that I could spend an entire video discussing it.